I'm going to talk briefly just about the overall approach first, the methodology, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about Ethekwini, the findings in Ethekwini. So to kick off with a little bit more on our approach, or what we set out to do, as Scott said, it was to develop an understanding of the quantities of food loss and wasted in Ethekwini, Tambo and Waterberg district municipalities, to understand and document the food system actors, the key actors in the food systems of these three municipalities who play a role in food waste, the food waste system, to develop certain food waste maps, ways of visualizing food waste in these areas, to highlight opportunities for the establishment of small businesses, community waste management systems for recovery, processing, and alternative uses of waste. And that was a key aspect of this, was looking at sustainable job opportunities. And then finally, developing recommendations on a framework that the municipalities can use across the country to understand food loss and waste and manage the opportunities, the job creation opportunities in loss and waste activities. So overall, to summarize, an understanding of the food loss and waste streams in these three areas, and then really highlighting where the opportunities for inclusive growth and sustainable job opportunities would be in these municipalities, and giving the municipalities some tools to understand and work with this. So the approach which we designed for this piece of work was to kick off with a desktop research phase. And the desktop research phase was then built into two major components of that, a literature review, and running at the same time some key informant interviews, and these two informed each other. And we did do a fairly extensive literature review, and as Scott says, the literature, much of which was provided by organizations like the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa and the CSIR, but that literature review is available and summarized in our reports. And then the key informant interviews were also very key in quickly getting up to speed with the food loss and waste issue and where things were at. To summarize, there were four probably key sources of information or players or actors that had produced information, for food loss and waste. Those being the CSIR, the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, WWF, and the government. And I'll briefly summarize some of the key aspects of those work, and particularly what from that work informed the study as a whole. Two basic aspects to the approach. The first was the desktop research, which I've talked through, and then very quickly we then went into the longer phase of the project, which was per municipality, a series of detailed actor interviews and meetings to quantify the food loss and waste streams. So as Scott has said, food loss and waste data is not readily available at municipal level. And our approach was really to derive pictures of food loss and waste through engagement with the main actors that were involved in each area. So that summarizes the approach that we followed. Has it advanced to the next screen?
Yes, it has.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. Got through that little technical glitch. All right, so as I said, some of the key literature that really summarizes where we are in a country from a food loss and waste aspect is a lot of the key work has been produced by a few organizations, one of which is the CSIR. And I'm sure some of you probably are familiar with this work, but the CSIR over a period of years have produced some technical reports into food loss and waste, and the most recent of them was published in May 2021. So it's very current. And really the key thing in the first diagram up above there is that for the country as a whole, across the different aspects of the food value chain, we produce around 10.3 million tons of waste. And you can see there where that waste emanates. It might be a bit small, but the first block is primary production, agriculture. Then we move on to the other aspects of the value chain through processing, retail and distribution, wholesale and consumers, adding up to 10.3 million tons. In this little sketch at the bottom, we have the CSR have then split that out into the stages of the value chain, but also the major commodities. So a fairly accurate picture, which has been refined over the years, and is an average of the food loss and waste over a 5-year period. And as I say, adding up to 10.3 million tons. And I think that number is fairly well understood and fairly well now regarded as being fairly accurate. So the country produces around 10.3 million tons of food loss and waste. Other key bit of information or literature or sources of literature produced by the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, who have a food loss and waste voluntary agreement and have piloted and developed this food loss and waste voluntary agreement. And the key thing about this is that they currently have 66 core and 32 associate signatories, so organizations that have signed up to this food loss and waste agreement. And essentially, these organizations, particularly the core organizations that are largely companies, have committed to reducing food loss and waste in their value chains by 50% by 2030. So it's a voluntary agreement. It's not binding, but the organizations have committed to that through this agreement. The CGCSA is also then developing working groups on different aspects of how we're going to get there. And have provided a whole lot of measurement and reporting tools. They're doing a baseline in this year, and much of this is defined by the Food Loss and Waste Protocol, which is really just a standard which provides a monitoring and evaluation, or a measurement standard, and also then looks at the possible destinations of food waste. So it's a way that organizations can understand their food loss and waste, document their food loss and waste, report on it, and then look at the different ways that food loss and waste can be beneficiated. WWF have also produced a lot of very valuable information, literature on food loss and waste. And one of the key aspects of their research, or the information that is presented by WWF, is a little schematic on the left-hand side, which is a hierarchy on how to beneficiate food loss and waste. So landfill being the last resort, moving up the hierarchy, composting, anaerobic digestion, feed to animals, food to people, and then key, obviously, reducing food loss and waste. So organizations are provided with the tools through the CGSA and WWF to look at their food loss and waste streams and see how to improve and get to that 50% reduction target. Finally, the government has a national waste management strategy, and that has led to a number of initiatives, particularly the Western Cape Department of Environmental Affairs and Development have instituted a 50% restriction on organic waste being disposed to landfill by 2022, and a full prohibition of organic waste disposed to landfill by 2027. So that's really setting the bar. Other provinces haven't yet come online with this, but this does really set the bar in terms of what the government is committing to doing. But clearly the government can only do that if all other stakeholders toe the line, so to speak. So a summary, just a very quick summary of some of the key literature that informed our study. Sorry, I'm going to move on from that. And then just to then move on to the second aspect of my presentation, which is then how we documented the food loss and waste in Ethekwini municipalities, how we practically applied this and documented things in Ethekwini. So as stated, the major phase of the study was then given that food loss and waste data didn't exist at a municipal level or doesn't exist at a municipal level, our way of achieving, finding out the information was really through key informant interviews. And we held interviews and deep discussions with 23 individuals, or 28 individuals across 23 interviews, and interviewed 28 different individuals. And then had a series of different meetings and site visits in Ethekwini. And you can see from the table, a range of private sector organizations, the Ethekwini Municipality itself, NGOs, different aspects of different players in the value chain, many different NGOs that are working on beneficiating waste streams. So a fairly comprehensive set of interviews and across the value chain, interviews done with stakeholders across the value chains. The overall result of this was that we found that quantifying the exact amounts of food and waste was not easy. There are many sources of food waste. Organizations do not sort waste streams at the moment. Many organizations do not sort their waste streams and do not report on it, or do not record quantities of food waste. And many organizations are diverting food, but on the positive side, many organizations are diverting their food waste from landfill. So that was possibly quite a not surprising finding, but it was a very positive finding that there is already a lot of beneficiation of waste happening. And another positive was the large-scale interest in this work, which is leading to communities of practice being formed in these municipalities. And in Ethekwini, we summarized everything by having a workshop with all the key stakeholders and setting a platform for continuation of this work as to looking for solutions for food loss and waste in Ethekwini. But what I'm going to do now is just really summarize just very quickly summarize a little bit of what we were able to find in Ethekwini. So to kick off with then that framework of the food loss and waste at a national level, the 10.3 million tons, and also importantly the percentages that come from the different aspects of the value chain. So 3.8 from primary production, 9.1% of the waste from post-harvest handling and storage are still pretty much on farm, then 27.4 from processing and manufacture, 3.9 from retail, wholesale and distribution, 13.1% of the waste generated by households. How does that look in a municipality, in a metro municipality, a metro like Ethekwini? And the best way to explain that is through just this color coding at the bottom there. And we postulated, we proposed the following and then tested it over time. And without providing the detailed numbers, we came up with this sketch which really just highlighted how that might be different in Ethekwini. So the majority of the food loss and waste, without getting into the detail of percentages, would come from retail, wholesale and distribution and households and consumers in Ethekwini, with some medium contribution from fruit and veg across the value chain. So yeah, I mean, pretty obvious. Ethekwini is not a big agricultural area. Where there is farming, it's fruit and vegetables. There isn't much, there's no cereal production happening in Ethekwini. There's no oilseed and pulses. So there wouldn't be any loss there until we get to the retail, wholesale and distribution. So yeah, the majority of food loss and waste coming from these two, which is, a little bit different to the national picture. But as I say again, Ethekwini is a metro. Then using this framework, we then did some deep dives into the aspects of the value chain where we could get information. So I must just qualify again that this was never intended to be an exhaustive study. We never intended to come up with these exact numbers for Ethekwini or any of the other municipalities. What we did intend to do is to get as much information as possible and get readily available information. And we summarized what we were able to achieve through the sketch at the top, which shows a number of different different aspects of the value chain, a number of different waste streams where we were able to quantify to some extent what the numbers were, or what the amounts of food loss and waste were. So number one there is waste to landfill from residents and tourists. How much waste is going to landfill from the general Ethekwini population? There we were able to quantify and in fact we're able to estimate that around 150,000 tons of food waste goes to landfill on an annual basis. Number two was the Clarewood fresh produce market. So the fresh produce markets in various areas are always quite a big point source of food loss and waste. They're pretty accurate data. 2,500 tons of condemned produce per year, but interestingly, only 750 tons of that goes to landfill. So quite a lot of beneficiation of waste happening, 750 tons landing up going to waste to landfill. And then, you know, the picture goes on. We got some data from Rainbow, RCL, previously Rainbow, from the SPA group. We were able to, and SPA group being very prominent in KZN, Ethekwini, we were able to get a lot of information. Then obviously hospitality is very prevalent in hotels, resorts, very prevalent in Ethekwini, and the markets. But let me move on to the detail. So food waste to landfill is as we've said, is a key. And through the study, we found that this was certainly the biggest waste stream in Ethekwini, and the biggest waste stream where further beneficiation was possible. To be able to quantify this was not easy, and I show some data for Cape Town, because Cape Town is actually the one metro that has done a lot of work on the food waste to landfill. And the other municipalities have not necessarily got such accurate data. So in Cape Town, there's an estimated 159,000 tons of food waste going to municipal landfills, and that was in 2020, or over 800 tons per day. 15% of this waste, it's 15% of the overall waste going to landfill is coming from food waste, and 28% if you add organic, if you add garden greens and residual. And as we've said, Cape Town is aiming to reduce their organic waste to landfill by 50% by 2022, this year that we're in. So we weren't able to get the accurate data for Ethekwini, but were able to estimate it from a number of different studies, and in fact from solid waste themselves. So without going through the detail, we could ascertain that food outlets, and that's you know, big and small food outlets, retail stores, restaurants, etc., that are serviced by CSW, account for around about 65,000 tons of food waste. And the household members, so that's food outlets, people eating at food outlets, but then purely from household and from the bins collected from households. The number, and here we're not sure of the accuracy of numbers, but it's at least 30,000 tons, and it could be as high as 15,000 tons of food waste emanating from households. And we can go through, I'm not going to go through the detail now. A number of studies have been done on how much waste is produced at household level, but none of these were actually in Ethekwini in a detailed level. So we are using studies that were done in other areas to approximate how much is coming out of Ethekwini households. I'm moving fairly quickly through this, but as I said, the other point source was the Clarewood fresh produce market. So detailed data, they're very accurate data. They do keep very accurate data on what's condemned, and then well, what's condemned is wasted. But the positive side here is, of the figure of 2,500 tons that's condemned every year, 1,750 tons is actually sent to animal feed. and only 750 tons to landfill. So if you recall that hierarchy of disposing of food waste, this is going to animal feed, which is quite far up the hierarchy. So that's positive, but there's still opportunities to look at, well, there's still opportunities to better beneficiate the 750 tons. As I mentioned, SPA, also very prevalent in Ethekwini, as they are in other metros, keep very accurate data. And again, without going through the detail, 1,200 tons, sorry, no, that's a bit more than that. It's 1,500 tons of food loss and waste produced per annum in Ethekwini. But if you look at the little chart down there, a lot of that, by far the biggest proportion of that is actually going to people. So it's SPA distributing this to charities, etc. A smaller percentage, but still a significant percentage going to animal feed, some going to composting, and a relatively small number going to landfill. So here's an example of a private sector organization that is doing as much as they probably can to divert food from landfill. Hospitality, as we said, is very big in Ethekwini. Getting detailed data or getting a summary of the situation was quite difficult, but we were able to get various data largely through the Tsogo Sun group. So a couple of things, the Gateway Mall, for instance, produces 360 tons of food loss and waste, which all goes to landfill. But quite significant here was the fact that the major hotel groups, particularly in Umhlanga, and that don't actually have accurate data on their food loss and waste. And this is largely because of the system in place, which is to macerate their food loss and waste and dispose of it into the sewer. And that leads into another set of huge problems. But it does lead to opportunities, clearly leads to big opportunities. And on the positive side, Tsogo Sun are really actively looking to do things like developing composting operations with local communities, etc. So significant opportunities exist in hospitality in Ethekwini. And then also within the markets, so Ethekwini has got a rich array of retail markets, smaller markets. We talked about the Clarewood Fresh Produce Market, but they have this rich array of much smaller markets. And collectively, they're producing 16,000 tons of food waste. One market in particular producing 5,500 tons of food waste a year. And definitely opportunities exist in that area. So to summarize this, again, a little bit of a detailed picture, but really just concentrate on this column relatively in the middle here. These are some of the waste streams and what's happening to them. So food outlets serviced by solid waste, Durban solid waste, 65,000 tons going directly to landfill. Households serviced by solid waste in Durban, 34,000 tons going directly to landfill. Retail markets, the smaller markets in Ethekwini, 16,000 tons going directly to landfill. Durban beachfront hotels, Umhlanga Durban beachfront hotels, 1,000 tons approximately going into the sewer wastewater system. Clarewood Fresh Produce Market, on the other hand, 2,500 tons, but 1,750 of that's going to animal feed already. Only 750 tons is going to landfill. So this table here then demonstrates the amounts, relative amounts going to landfill, the sources of those quantities, and then through the next graphic, where the opportunities are to beneficiate those, to change that. So this 750 from the Clarewood Fresh Produce Market could actually be distributed for human consumption. So it could be taken right up this hierarchy because of the quality of what that is. The food outlets serviced by solid waste, that wouldn't be available for human consumption, but could go to, some of it could go to composting and aerobic, some of it anaerobic, some of it animal feed. So a graphic that highlights the sort of opportunities. And it's this that we then workshopped with the stakeholders at the end of the process in Ethekwini. What's the final sort of piece of the jigsaw that's interesting is when one starts looking at the opportunities for job creation, we find a very similar situation of waste interventions can be ranked according to their job generation potential. And this ranking sort of matches the traditional waste hierarchy. So as you move up this hierarchy, you actually create more jobs. So you're not, diverting food waste from landfill to feeding animals or feeding people. As you move further up this hierarchy, you actually create more jobs. So the two work in tandem with each other. So workshopping all of this, we sort of set off on this journey to then, with these stakeholders, start looking at how the quantities of waste to landfill could be further beneficiated, through community food waste recycling, in-vessel composting, how the Clearwood fresh produce market, that would probably go to soup kitchens and delivery to communities. But we provided this framework to actually now enter into discussions and for the stakeholders to then look at the opportunities to further beneficiate their waste streams. And on that note, I'd like to sort of wrap up what we did in Ethekwini and hand over to the other players to look at the other areas. I think just to summarize then, there are many food waste beneficiation opportunities, but the largest is clearly in this whole area of waste to landfill coming from communities, coming from households. That's the largest opportunities are in that area, and significant opportunities for developing community businesses to work with those waste streams.